Hello, today is session 3 on classroom management. Today we will really be looking at what does your management plan need in order to help your students be successful in the classroom. This will also include looking at a discipline plan, or what do we do when students are not responding to the expectations we have given them. Also know that today's learning is really about the dynamic learning experiences that we have within the teaching and learning objective in the strategic plan. Classroom management plan is really about good core instruction. In order to increase student engagement and academic outcomes, it's crucial to have a consistent plan that is aligned to school-wide expectations. In order to implement the 4 C's effectively under the dynamic learning experiences, which would include critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration, a management plan is crucial. The classroom conditions need to be structured by a teacher in order for these things to occur at the highest potential. The desired outcomes for today are really going to be about you exploring the importance of these components that are in the classroom and management discipline plan. We're going to take a look at classroom structure, talk about the importance of displaying classroom rules that are consistent and clear. We're also going to look at corrective action for early stage misbehaviors and look at establishing corrective consequences for rule violation. When those things don't work, we need to know when to use and not use a disciplinary referral. The desired outcomes of this session link to having an understanding of what components are needed to have strong classroom management. These will include structures, rules, and a plan for correcting behavior. You took 2 surveys at the beginning. One was on student needs and one was on teacher needs, so these should look familiar to you. Make sure to have these out as a reference as we go through the content for today. Classroom structure is an important consideration in any management plan. Teacher and student needs play into how structured the plan should be. Please have your scores totaled for when we get to the next part. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment now for you to calculate those scores and get them out for our next slide. This slide has a table for you to put your scores in and determine the best structure to meet your needs and your student needs. Your needs are listed along the top in low, medium, and high. On the left-hand column, you will see where your students' needs fall. On the teacher needs questionnaire, a score of 0 to 20 would indicate low structure and that you would be fine with any type of setting. If you scored in the 21 to 60, this would be medium structure. If you scored 61 to 100, you would need a high structure. This would be, even if your students scored in the lower medium area, you would function best with a high structured classroom. When you look at the student needs questionnaire, you will also have either a low, medium, or high. If you score 0 to 30 on the student needs questionnaire, this would indicate the need for low structure. A 31 to 60 would indicate the need for a medium to high structure. And a 61 to 120 would represent the need for a high structure. Refer to the Interpreting Your Results section at this time on your handouts from the beginning activity. I will give you a moment to look at your own score and determine where you fall within the table. Here is a further definition of what you might need to consider when determining your classroom structure. Based on the results from the previous table, you should have some sense of what level of structure is needed. For example, if low structure was what you found on the table. You would use all parts of the management plan, but you could use components needed that will only motivate and ignore procedures that might be unnecessary or not needed that would be included on the medium or high structure. Always start the year off with high structure. This is really a best practice when you're not sure of your student needs. You can also make adjustments as the year progresses. It's important to know that the management plan can be fluid from time to time. As your students' behavior increases or decreases throughout the year, knowing how they are when they come back from break, looking at first semester versus second semester, you may need to be flexible in your structure. The first part of the management plan is really looking at developing and displaying classroom rules. Rules should be used to create expectations. Please realize that rules and expectations are different. You will see the rules on the left that have really been built upon the class expectations. The class expectations on the right are directly aligned with school-wide expectations. It's important to be consistent with school-wide expectations when you're in the classroom. This way students will have an idea of what is expected of them. Going back to the classroom rules, you will see in the above example, listen to your teacher is a rule that could logically link to the more broad expectation of being respectful. When you go to develop your classroom rules, there are some conditions to consider when you're developing these. You should always state things positively, just as your class expectations. Avoid using terms like no, not, or don't. You should always be specific and refer to observable behaviors. So for example, number 2, come to class on time and have your binder and pencil. This is very specific about what behavior you want to see. Rules are taught using positive and negative examples. It's important to model what you should do and what you should not do. Rules should also be applicable throughout the entire class period. Having them posted in a visible location for students to be able to see and to be able to point and refer back to when needed is very helpful. I mentioned this earlier about classroom rules and expectations being linked to school-wide expectations, but I just want to reiterate this point again. Core behavior systems for schools is very important, and having class expectations that are directly aligned to those make it easier for students to understand what is expected of them. It's always important to mention the observable behavior and make the point to be mindful of the language you use when you're correcting behavior. We will talk more about that later on. The second part about developing and displaying classroom rules is the importance of having student buy-in to these. Displaying classroom rules may be better understood visually. If you go back to the question of how structured your management plan should be, take some time to see how teachers display rules and how their rules may read. Feel free to pause the presentation now. Go to the resources directly under the title Management Plan. These are all video links. You can also wait until the end of the presentation to click on these video links. If you pause the presentation, you will have to reopen it and fast forward to continue where you left off. I hope you will find these videos and links helpful. The next part of having a successful management and discipline plan is developing a plan for how you're going to correct early stage misbehaviors. Now, early stage misbehaviors are really defined as those behaviors that happen that have not become a pattern. Once a particular misbehavior has become habitual, it's really past the early stage and it's more difficult to correct. We'll talk about corrective consequences later on in the content for today, but right now we're going to focus on corrective strategy. You will find a handout in the resource section to give you more examples of corrective strategy. Just to go through some of these corrective strategies quickly, for example, pre-correction. Pre-correction essentially means that you prompt the desired behavior, following the rules. Proximity. In the classroom, it involves simply moving toward the students who are engaged in the misbehavior. The proximity correction strategy is based on the principle of human behavior that is often used very effectively in the public. For example, proximity. If you see a police car as you're driving down the highway, you often put on your brakes and start to slow down. Just having that proximity is a reminder that you should go the speed limit. The gentle verbal reprimand are usually short, 1 or 2 words or very short sentences. They cause only a very brief interruption of your lesson and are given when you are physically near misbehaving students, not across the room. It's always important not to correct behavior in front of the whole class. I want to go back to the gentle verbal reprimand one more time, where it says the 4 questions. The 4 questions may not seem like anything you've heard before, but if you are a Capturing Kids' Heart school, these will seem very familiar to you. You can use these whether you're a Capturing Kids' Heart school or not. I'm going to talk about it here for a minute. But this is also a great way for correcting early stage misbehavior. The 4 questions can be used as a way to process the early stage behavior. For example, going up, being close to the student and saying, "What are you doing? What are you supposed to be doing? Are you doing it? What are you going to do about it? And what's going to happen if you choose to do it again?" Always be mindful of your tone and the proximity to the student. Again, having these whole class for everybody to hear is probably not the best way to correct an early stage misbehavior. Before I go on to the next slide, I want to talk just a second about the positive feedback when behavior improves. Giving students reinforcement for doing the right thing is a huge piece to teaching behavioral expectations and reinforcing the behavior that you want to see. It's also important to praise students who are behaving responsibly. Teacher praise that is contingent upon appropriate student behavior has been shown to increase the desired behavior. There's lots of research to support this. When one student is misbehaving, it can sometimes be effective to use specific descriptive praise addressed to 1 or more students who are behaving responsibly at the same moment. This can often help the student who's not behaving appropriately to see the positive praise to the other students and correct their behavior.